The rise of NFL fantasy football. Everything you need to know. NFL fantasy football has exploded in popularity over the last 2 decades, evolving from a niche hobby into a multi-billion-dollar industry, with millions of participants around the world. What once started as a simple form of entertainment among friends has grown into a cultural phenomenon, deeply intertwined with the NFL and the broader sports landscape. For both avid football fans and casual followers alike, fantasy football has become a dynamic way to engage with the sport, offering excitement, strategy, and competition. In this video, we'll explore the history of fantasy football, how it works, why it has risen in popularity, and how it has impacted the NFL and sports culture at large. Whether you're a seasoned fantasy football player or new to the game, this guide will provide all the insights you need to understand the rise of NFL fantasy football. The origins of fantasy football. Fantasy football's roots can be traced back to the 1960s, when a limited group of NFL enthusiasts sought to deepen their engagement with the sport. The game's first iteration, called the Greater Oakland Professional Pigskin Prognosticators League, GOPPL, was created in 1962 by Wilfred Bill Winkenbach, a part owner of the Oakland Raiders. Along with a group of fellow football fans, Winkenbach devised a scoring system where participants would draft NFL players and receive points based on those players' weekly performances. While the GOPPL started small, with only a handful of participants, its success laid the foundation for future versions of the game. However, fantasy football remained relatively unknown for decades, with growth hindered by the logistical challenges of managing scores and player statistics manually. The Internet Revolution. Fantasy football's breakthrough. The rise of the Internet in the mid-1990s was the catalyst that brought fantasy football to the masses. Before the Internet, scoring had to be done manually, and players often had to wait until the next day to check newspapers or sports broadcasts for updates on their teams. With the advent of online platforms, however, managing a fantasy football league became easier and more accessible. Websites like Yahoo, ESPN, and CBS Sports began offering free fantasy football platforms that automatically tracked player statistics, allowing users to focus solely on drafting and managing their teams. The ability to play online transformed fantasy football from a niche game for hardcore sports enthusiasts into an accessible pastime for millions of people. The barriers to entry were lowered, and suddenly, anyone with a computer and an internet connection could join a league. As a result, participation soared, and by the early 2000s, fantasy football had solidified its place as a major component of the sports landscape. How fantasy football works. For those unfamiliar with the structure of fantasy football, here's a breakdown of how the game typically works. League setup. Fantasy football leagues typically consist of 8 to 14 participants. Each player acts as a manager of their own team, and the league operates similarly to a real NFL league with a regular season and playoffs. Draft. At the start of each season, league members participate in a draft where they select players from the NFL to form their fantasy team. The draft can be either a snake draft, where picks are made in reverse order every other round, or an auction draft, where managers bid on players. Starting lineup. Each week, managers set a starting lineup consisting of players in specific positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense. Points are awarded based on how well these players perform in real NFL games. Scoring. Scoring systems vary from league to league, but typically include points for touchdowns, yards gained, and other statistical achievements like receptions or field goals. Negative points can also be assigned for turnovers or poor defensive performances. Waivers and trades. Throughout the season, managers can make trades with other teams or add/drop players from the waiver wire, unclaimed players, to improve their teams. Playoffs. Most leagues have a playoff system at the end of the fantasy season, where the top teams compete to win the league championship. Why fantasy football is so popular. Fantasy football offers a unique blend of excitement, competition, and camaraderie that few other hobbies can match. Several factors have contributed to its rise in popularity. Deepened fan engagement. Fantasy football has transformed the way fans watch NFL games. Instead of merely rooting for their favorite team, fantasy football players become invested in multiple games, often rooting for individual players on teams they wouldn't otherwise follow. This multiplies the excitement on game days and gives fans a reason to watch more than just their hometown team. Social interaction. Many leagues are formed among friends, family, or coworkers, creating an environment of friendly competition and bonding. Draft parties, weekly trash talk, and end-of-season celebrations have become traditions in many leagues, adding a layer of personal connection to the game. Strategy and skill. Fantasy football is not purely about luck. While injuries or surprise performances can impact outcomes, the game rewards those who research, strategize, and make informed decisions. Choosing the right players, making timely trades, and managing a team well can lead to victory, making it a test of skill for dedicated managers. Gambling aspect. While many fantasy football leagues are played for fun, a significant portion of participants also play for money. The financial incentive adds another layer of excitement, especially in larger leagues or daily fantasy football competitions, where big payouts are possible. Media integration. Fantasy football is heavily integrated into NFL broadcasts, with sports channels like ESPN and NFL Network offering dedicated segments and analysis for fantasy football. Shows like NFL Red Zone cater specifically to fantasy players by offering coverage of every scoring play in real time, keeping fans constantly updated on how their players are performing. The economic impact of fantasy football. Fantasy football has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry, impacting not only the NFL, but also the broader economy. According to the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, FSGA, there are approximately 60 million fantasy sports participants in the US and Canada, with football being the most popular sport. Fantasy football has generated significant revenue through advertisements, premium league fees, daily fantasy contests, and merchandise. Daily fantasy football, offered by companies like DraftKings and FanDuel, has added an entirely new dimension to the fantasy sports economy. Unlike traditional fantasy football, where leagues last for an entire season, daily fantasy allows users to draft a new team each week and compete for cash prizes. This has attracted a different subset of players, some of whom are more interested in the financial aspect of the game than in the traditional season-long commitment. The NFL has also embraced fantasy football, recognizing it as a way to increase fan engagement. Fantasy football players are more likely to watch games, purchase NFL merchandise, and subscribe to services like NFL Game Pass. In turn, this boosts TV ratings and advertising revenue for the league. Fantasy football's cultural influence. The rise of fantasy football has also had a noticeable impact on sports culture. Fantasy football terminology and discussions have become part of everyday conversation, especially during the NFL season. Fantasy football analysts and podcasts have become popular sources of information, offering advice on player rankings, waiver wire picks, and draft strategies. Furthermore, the popularity of fantasy football has influenced how fans view players. In the past, a fan's loyalty was primarily tied to their favorite team, but now, many fans root for players across different teams. This has shifted the focus from team-based fandom to player-based fandom, altering the traditional dynamics of NFL support. The rise of NFL fantasy football is a testament to the game's enduring appeal and the power of the internet to connect fans to the sports they love. What began as a small-time hobby has become a cultural force that keeps millions of fans invested in the NFL every season. Whether it's the thrill of managing a team, the camaraderie with friends, or the strategic challenge of outsmarting opponents, fantasy football offers something for everyone. As the NFL continues to grow in popularity, so too will fantasy football, ensuring its place as a cornerstone of modern sports culture. If you haven't yet tried fantasy football, now is the time to dive in. With countless leagues and platforms available, you'll discover a new way to experience the NFL and deepen your love for the game. Happy crafting! What do you think of our video? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button. Also, subscribe to our channel before you go. Thank you for watching.